Okay, in this video tutorial we're going to be doing a still life with a very light background, and in this image we're going to open it in the raw processor, and we're going to adjust temperature in all the different settings that you see on the very first toolbar that you see on the right side. You see temperature and tint and so forth. We're going to adjust those. Once we do that, and we adjust everything in the raw processor, then we will open it, and then from there we will crop the image, and then we'll do some retouching to remove the wrinkles and any imperfections that we see in the image. Then we will add a blur effect, and then we will create depth of field with the blur effect using a layer mask and a gradient tool. So we're doing a lot of different editing to this image to make this image look really nice when all is said and done. So the first thing we want to do is open the image with the raw processor, and we want to probably make this a little bit not cool. I wouldn't want to make it a cool tone. I think it would be better in a warm tone. So we'll slide it across a little bit. However, you might notice that if you double click on this little triangle shape here, it sets it back to the original setting. So we can move it a little bit across just to make it a little bit more warm, and then we'll probably want to also not have a green tint but have more of a purple tint. There's the original setting. We can move it a little bit just to give it more of a reddish purple tint. Now we're going to come over here to recovery before we go to exposure. If we look at the histogram here, we've got a good exposure, but let's see if there's any areas that need some recovery. So if we drag it across, we can see that the histogram is now a little bit higher. Before it was a little bit more flat, a little bit more to the right. So we can move it a little bit over and recover some of the detail that we might have lost. And then if we add a little bit of exposure, we see that it lightens it up again. So really, right about here is good. This mid-tone here with a little bit of a mountain peak on our histogram. We can add, we don't want to add fill light because it's going to make it too light. We can add a little bit of black, that'll add some nice intensity. We don't want to add too much brightness because then it's overdone, that looks terrible. So double click on our little triangle shape here to set it back to the original setting. We can add a little bit of contrast, that might be nice, but too much contrast loses detail and it washes areas out, so we'll undo that. We don't want to wash anything out. We can add slight contrast. We can add a little bit of clarity, which will sharpen the image. So if we go Control plus, we can zoom in and check the clarity on that. You can see how that sharpens up a bit, and with no clarity at all, it softens it. So right there in the middle is where it originally is set for, so we can just sharpen it up just a little bit, not too much. If we go Control minus, we can add a little bit of vibrance, which will add a little more intensity to color, but we don't want to overdo it because then it looks kind of yellowy. So we don't want to do that, overdo it. Add a little bit of vibrance, add a little bit of saturation, but again, we don't want to overdo it because then it really polarizes the image. So bring that down, maybe add a little bit of saturation just to intensify the color. Again, we can go back, Control minus, and just kind of look at the whole image in general. Go Control plus. Great. I think we're done with this particular vertical toolbar on the raw processor. We're going to move to a different one. We're going to click over here on our little detail button, which looks like a green triangle. Click on that. We're going to go Control plus, and we're going to check out the sharpen. Nothing changed much, so that means that we probably did as much as we can do, which is good. So we can go ahead and put that up slightly, but it doesn't look like much is changing. We can check the noise reduction, and I don't see much of anything changing on that, so that means that we didn't cause any noise, which is good. So now we can open the image and we are ready to crop the image. So to crop the image, we are going to click on our vertical toolbar, click on our cropping tool, and we're going to have a resolution of 300, a height of 8, and a width of 10, because it's a horizontal image, so we want to crop this as a horizontal image. I'm going to drag my crop tool across here, and I want to cut off the bottom of the mirror that's in this image. I don't want to include the bottom part of the mirror, the edge, so I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. I want to make sure my cropping stays inside the image. I'm going to end up cropping a little bit of the right side of the flowers. I'm going to crop out that edge of the mirror on the very bottom, and I'm going to crop in a little closer to the plate. Okay, so when I'm done, it looks like this. It looks like I'm going to need to retouch this bottom part just a little bit here. That's fine. So what I want to do now is I want to duplicate my image. I'm going to call it working image. Say OK. I always want to duplicate because I never want to do any changes to my image to the background layer. This is our original image and we don't want to change that. So we only want to make changes to our working image. I'm going to crop in, go Control plus, and use my navigator to move it down to the left bottom corner. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my image and see what I need to retouch. I'm going to click on my clone stamp tool, which looks like a stamp. I'm going to Alt, and I'm going to look and see what I need to retouch down here. I'm actually going to crop in just a little bit. Control plus, going to crop in just a little closer. And I have some little brown specks I want to remove. As I'm cloning this, I'm going to put my opacity down to about 50% on my cloning brush so that I clone a little slower and I really control what I'm cleaning up on here. I want to clone like dark wrinkles in the fabric that really stand out. There's not too much to do on this left side. I'm going to move to the right side into the little bit darker area. I see a little bit in the flower I want to clone. I see some kind of darker areas in the fabric I want to clone out. Some little wrinkles that I want to get rid of in the fabric. And it looks like I need to definitely clone this bottom edge a little bit where I couldn't crop the mirror out completely. So I'm going to get rid of that. Now I may end up, I'm actually going to put my opacity up to 100% because that's a very clean and very simple clone, and so I don't need to be too careful on that. So I constantly, as I clone here, I'm constantly left clicking and constantly clicking on my Alt to kind of change, what I'm cloning so that I don't create a cloning pattern. I don't want to create a cloning pattern. I want to vary my cloning pattern. Okay, so now I'm going to put my opacity back down to 50% as I come up here into this wrinkled area. Very carefully, I've got some green I want to clone out there. A couple of white specks probably dust spots on the camera that need to be cleaned pretty badly. Camera probably needs to be cleaned, yes. Serviced and I'm gonna move my opacity down a little bit lower. I want to make sure I don't create like white spots. When I clone, it has to be the same color, the same tone. So if I have a lower opacity on my cloning brush, it makes it so it goes a lot slower and I have a lot more control. I see some white spots that need to be cloned. White spots that need to be cloned. Little wrinkles in the fabric that need to be cloned. I've got a big wrinkle right here that I want to get rid of. Just the edge of the wrinkle, maybe not so much the whole thing, but just soften up that edge on that wrinkle a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to show you what I've done on the bottom left and bottom right side of the image. I'm constantly moving this around. I'm constantly holding down the Alt and left clicking so that I create a variety. I don't want to create a cloning pattern that looks the same. So we'll back out and let's turn off the working image and let's see if we can see a difference here. You can see that the wrinkles have been softened a little bit. The bottom right corner, the mirror removed. I feel like I still need to remove more wrinkles from right here, so I'm gonna boost that opacity up a little bit higher, make my brush a little bit bigger, and really kind of more aggressively get in on that wrinkle. And now you can see a big difference. So I have a lot of wrinkles in the background here, so let's go Control Plus I mean. Let's zoom in on the left corner. Okay, I want to get rid of this mirror edge, so I'm just going to completely retouch out that mirror edge so it kind of blends in with the white background. I'm going to come up here and kind of get in on that the wrinkles that I'm noticing here. I'm just going to soften them up a little bit by retouching them out. Now I will soften them even more with the blur effect, but sometimes it's nice to kind of clean them up just slightly, just a little bit, just so that when you go to blur it, it makes your job a little easier. Okay. Over. That's like a pleat in the fabric, so I'm going to leave that there, this darker area here. Soften up that. Oops, I added too much, so I'm going to undo that. Go back on art history if you don't like what you did. I'm going to leave this because that's a pleat, and I'm going to remove some of those darker wrinkles. Move it over a little bit and take out some of those wrinkles. Okay, so now I'm going to back up and look at the image and just check my work. If I turn it off, you can see what's what's been done. You can see that a lot of wrinkles have been removed. I'm kind of at the point where I'm going to remove the rest of these wrinkles, I think, with, or maybe just a little bit right here, with the Gaussian blur. I'm going to use a Gaussian blur, or a surface blur, or a motion blur. You have 3 different choices, and I recommend you experiment with all of them to see which one you like the best. So let's look at that again. Just turn it off. You can see lots of imperfections in the fabric. Lots of imperfections in the fabric. And I'm going to leave, I'm actually going to go in on the cake. And I'm going to take out some of the areas where you can see some of the, I'm going to add frosting over some of the areas where you can see some of the brown. Bring this down a little bit lower. Cover up the white cake that we see below a little bit. I'm going to undo it actually, because I'm thinking that I might want to go in with a I'm actually gonna, never mind, I'm gonna go ahead and put that back in. But I'm thinking that I might want to clone this a little more precisely, so I might go in with a little bit of a sharper brush, more exact brush, so I can clone this edge of the frosting a little more across, a little more precisely. There we go. That looks a lot better. And just clean up that edge there a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to go Control minus, and then we turn off the working image. We can see a lot of work's been done. Look at the cake. Look at the wrinkles in the fabric, the little white spots. I even got rid of like the mirror. I got rid of the mirror up here and the mirror down here. Okay, so now it's time to duplicate this layer and call this the blur effect. And I'm going to come up here to filter, blur, and let's try Gaussian blur. And put it at about, I'm going to blur it right now. First I'm going to blur it for the background. I'm going to look at the background and go, oh, that's pretty soft, it's out of focus, I don't see any wrinkles. But then I'm going to step it up and even a little bit more. So that's about 25. I'm going to put it at a little bit higher, at like 40. And now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to opacity, and I'm going to adjust the opacity down, and I'm just going to look for the background. I want the wrinkles to be gone in the background. And I think I'm going to probably keep it at about, I'm looking only at the background. Everything else right now is way out of focus. That's okay. I'm going to keep it at like about 90% so that I don't see any wrinkles in the background. That's all I'm looking at right now. Now I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to come over here to my gradient tool on the vertical toolbar, and I'm going to make sure I select linear gradient, and I'm going to adjust the opacity down on that to 40%, and I'm going to drag, make sure my layer mask is selected. I'm going to drag my gradient tool starting at the bottom, and I'm going to go to the top. And I'm going to start to see a little bit of the blur effect being removed on the bottom of my layer mask. I'm just going to do it more in the center because I want So I want, so we have a cake plate. It's sitting on a mirror, and I want the background to be out of focus. And I want the background that's reflected in the mirror to also be out of focus. The area that I want to be sharp is the center area where the cake and flowers are. So after I've kind of worked the gradient tool a little bit, I'm going to remove a little bit from the bottom, but keep the background at the top really soft. I'm going to click on my layer mask again. I'm going to go in with this time with a brush tool. And I want to use a really soft brush, really soft edge brush. That's really important. I'm going to put my opacity at about 60%. And I'm going to remove all of the softness off of the flowers. The flowers that are not reflected in the mirror. Because what happens when an object reflects in the mirror is it becomes a little bit blurry and a little bit softer. So I'm only taking the soft focus off of the flowers that are not reflected in the mirror. I'm leaving the ones that are in the mirror really soft still, okay? So I'm going to go Control Plus, and I'm going to really zoom in close. Make sure I'm only taking the soft focus off of the actual flowers. I'm going to take it off the plate, the real plate, not the one reflected in the mirror. And I'm also going to take it off the cake, the real cake. Okay, what's starting to happen is my layer mask is starting to look kind of like a silhouette of a flower, right? And now if I make a mistake, and let's say I accidentally take the blur effect off of something that I'm not supposed to take off, then, like for example here, I'm purposely going off of the background here. If we go in close and we bring our navigator, we can see a bit of sharpness around the flowers. We don't want that, so we're going to come over here to our foreground and background. We're going to reverse it so we have the white on top, and I'm going to put that soft background back in again. Okay, I'm putting in the soft background again so that my background is nice and soft. The only thing that is sharp is flowers, which are in front of the background. And if we keep the rules of the depth of field in mind, that's fine, because that's where our focus was. That's where we want our objects to be sharp. They were in focus. They were the sharpest point of the image. The background was out of focus, and the background that's reflecting in the mirror is out of focus. And you're going to have to adjust your brush size as you work on this, okay? You know, as you get into closer areas, you're going to definitely need to have a smaller brush to really work and get in those small areas. Okay. So now I'm going to start moving over here to the cake and taking the blur off the cake. I'm going to go in with a bigger brush because I've got a pretty big area here to take my blur off. But as I move to the edge, I'm going to go really small because I don't want to accidentally go off the edge of the cake and get into the background. So I'm being really careful when I go around that edge. I want my cake to be super sharp. And as I go to the center of the cake, I can make my brush, you know, a little bigger because I'm working in a safer area. But as I get closer to that edge, I'm going to use my bracket keys to make my brush smaller. And if I use the bracket keys, then it allows me to quickly change my brush size. And I'm going to go around the edge of the plate and remove the softness off the edge of the plate, not getting the background. I'm leaving the plate that's sitting on the mirror. I'm taking off the softness on the cake. I'm removing it from the actual cake. I'm removing it from the actual plate. The plate that's reflected in the mirror, I'm leaving that soft. Okay, because an object that's reflected in the mirror oftentimes becomes a lot softer. Okay, so I really now have got this very nice silhouette of a cake and flowers in my layer mask right here. Now, because I have a 60% opacity on my brush, it doesn't come off all of it at once. You have to kind of go over it a few times to really remove all that softness. And so that's nice because it gives you a lot more control and lets you see exactly what you're doing. And I like to work really close with my navigator. I like to get in really close, see exactly what I'm doing. Okay, now I'm going to zoom out and look at my work here. I've got a nice sharp cake. I got a very soft background. I've got a nice reflected flower and plate and cake in the mirror, which is all nice and soft, just like my background layer is nice and soft on the top here, right up here, nice and soft, sharp. These are the real objects that are focused on. They're nice and sharp. The reflection is nice and soft. The cake plate is nice and soft. And this background layer right here is nice and soft. We could remove a little bit of the blur from the flowers here. Make that maybe a little sharper. Maybe make the cake a little bit sharper. Just to add a little more contrast. But that's really about all you have to do. I go Control Plus, I can look at that a little more closely to make sure I like what I did. I have a very low opacity, like 40% on my brush. Just removing a little bit of the soft effects off of these. They're still blurred compared to these, okay, compared to the ones on top. But what it does is adds just a little more contrast. Adds a little more contrast in the cake. Control minus, and we zoom out. That looks pretty darn good. So we're going to go ahead and save this. But before we do that, we want to add a vignette. So I'm going to figure out my vignette color. I want to do a very light pale pink. So I'm going to actually pick one of the colors in here. Okay, let's try that. And now I'm going to come over here and go to my Create New Fill Adjustment layer, Solid Color, and it's going to put in this very kind of salmon color almost, this pale pink. Then I'm going to come over here and go to 2400 brush size and make sure it's a really, really soft brush. That's very important. I'm going to start clicking right in the center here. And as I do that, you start to notice that the center section is being removed, and it starts to make kind of this circular shape on my layer mask, leaving a nice, very dusty rose. That's what I would call this color. Kind of a dusty rose color that's along the edge of the image. It's at the top corners, the bottom corners. And we'll start to kind of create this nice oval shape on the layer mask here, and it just creates a really pretty vignette and just gives it a nice finishing look. And if we turn that off, you can see how that looks. And we can add it, and it just gives it a nice finishing look. It really does. We can make our brush a little bit smaller if we want to just intensify this section here just a little bit more to make sure we really removed everything from this oval shape here in the center. So if we look at this, we can see the whites along the edge of the layer mask represent the dusty rose color. Now we want to save this. We go File, Save As. And to save this, we want to go to the U drive. We want to call it Still Life 1 or Still Life 2, depending upon what number you're on. Underscore your first initial last name. Make sure you save it as a PSD file and make sure you save it in the U drive.